So let me introduce John Smith. He is a geography teacher, was a geography teacher of long-standing, head of department, worked with exam boards with dozens of schools in the UK and overseas. And this talk in particular and workshop that we've had for Year 13s on the NEA has always been very well received, and a lot of learners have found it very, very useful. So we're really pleased that he's agreed to come back again this year and give us this talk to Year 13s. So welcome, John.
Thank you. Now, I can't seem to...
Can you share your screen?
Not at the moment.
Okay, so if you find I've switched it on, so you should be able to. So if you go to the green button.
Yes, yeah.
It sometimes just takes a moment or two to...
Share screen. There we are.
Great.
Yes, that's what I need. Right, everybody, welcome. First thoughts. This is just a jotting down of thoughts about COVID and NEAs, which I put down wondering, well, can we profit from COVID? Of course, everybody's been suffering from COVID and it's causing all sorts of problems. And it's causing all sorts of problems, or it's going to cause all sorts of problems for you doing your NEAs. Could you actually make use of it? And I thought people could make a study of how COVID has affected travel patterns. And if you're going to do a study of travel patterns, you could perhaps take a sample of families to see how their traveling patterns, daily and weekly and monthly, have changed since COVID. And you can't go around interviewing everybody that you might have wished to originally. You've got to take a sample, but maybe your sample will be the families who live near you on the same street, or they can be the families of people in the same school bubble, and you can give your colleagues in that school bubble forms to take home for their families to fill in. And they could look at their journeys to work or their shops and services before lockdown at various stages during lockdown. And that minimizes your infection risk. It means you're bang up to date. It gets some interesting data, allows you to develop some interesting mapping techniques and some statistical analysis. So that was one thought. Rather than travel to work, perhaps you could do travel to school patterns and how these have changed since COVID. And you could study people coming to your school involving traffic, motor traffic, pedestrians, cycles, bus journeys, count all those, map the flows, do statistical analysis. You'd need to do questionnaire surveys, but you could do traffic counts to collect the data originally, then do more in-depth follow-up with some interviews to supplement the surveys. And you could do it entirely within your own school, within your own bubble, or possibly, and I've often thought about this being a useful thing even before COVID, go to your local primary school and see how they travel to school and whether in this present day and age they're doing more walking and cycling, whether they're getting more exercise, link it to healthy living, linking it to safe access to schools and so on. And again, either of those surveys, you could keep the surveys fairly simple. You wouldn't be able to test people at random, but you would have a distinct body of people who you could look at. Or then a comparative study of local shopping area, how that's been affected by COVID. Choose a town centre or a part of it, a suburban high street, a local estate centre, a box mall. And that's a phrase I've used before. I think it describes the kind of little shopping centre like the one at the top of Shields Road in Byker, where they're fairly newly built. It's built around a central car park, becoming more and more popular away from the town centre, but with a variety of modern shops. Go to one of those and study pedestrian flows, proportion of people wearing masks, observation of social distancing guidelines, and maybe do a questionnaire on the way shops are surviving and adapting to COVID. Studies of parks and public spaces, or in general, the effect of lockdown on different communities in your local area. And I was thinking when I put this down of different ethnic communities. How have different ethnic communities been affected by COVID? Or how student communities have been affected? Although you don't want to get too close to student communities in Newcastle at the moment because of, well, we've all heard about that. But it's worth thinking about. So those are just some ideas of how we could take COVID as a starting point for some of our projects. And then a final point, in any NEA work, you need to complete a critical assessment of your methods. Of course, you'll have lots of scope for analysing problems and opportunities presented by the current situation. Great. But also, even more important, you've got a chance to talk about the strategies that you've adopted to deal with the problems of COVID. And that could allow some original creative thinking, showing how you've adapted, showing how you've been able to move forward in difficult circumstances, and it gives you opportunities to gain marks for evaluation. And all the way through this talk, I'm going to be thinking about ways of gaining marks. That's what it's all about. Of course, gaining marks is done through writing good geography. So what I'm going to suggest is going to be about writing good geography and using that to gain marks. Right. That's what I need next. I hope you're all familiar with this. This is the candidate record form, which you all have to fill in. That first page, simple details of your name and number and declaring that you've done everything honestly, and then your teacher signing it to say that you've done everything honestly. And that's a commitment. You are committing to having done the work on your own without assistance, and your teacher's declaring that he or she has not given extra assistance to you apart from anything that's mentioned later on. So take that seriously. But just for now, I want to talk about the second page of the proposal. Again, your number and your name, and put your investigation title at the top. Now, I always say your investigation title must include an idea, a concept that you're going to test, the geography part, and a place. So in that investigation title, I am going to do a study of the way COVID-19 has affected the mall at the top of Shields Road, Byker. An idea and a place. I am going to study sand dune management on the coast at Druridge Bay. Study sand dune management and a place. Put those together so right away, right from the start, everyone knows what you're writing about. Anybody who reads this is straight away clued into what it's about. The first box, how it links to spec content. If you go to your specification document or go to a specification document online, you need to put clear links to which part of the spec you're connecting to. Each part of the spec has a special key number, very complicated, four numbers with full stops in between them. So get those right. Get the numbers in and a brief outline of the spec content that you're studying. Then you need a hypothesis or a question or an issue or the sub-questions or sub-hypotheses put in there. I think you ought to have a main hypothesis and then some sub-hypotheses in there, or a main question and some sub-questions. How many is a crucial question. This year, of all years, you're short of time for doing this. You're under pressure. Therefore, keep your sub-questions simple, straightforward, limited, logical. I think 2 or 3 sub-questions is enough. Don't try to do more. Don't try to over-elaborate. Keep it clear, keep it logical.
John, can I just interrupt a second? We're only seeing the first slide. Your PowerPoint's not on our view.
Oh dear.
So,
I'm only trying to go. Screen sharing is paused. Resume share.
it might be an internet connection problem.
Have you got, no, we should.
So if you just start your PowerPoint in the normal way.
Yeah, but I want, have you got that? Have you got the actual?
I've got the PowerPoint, but it's just that the first slide, the blue one that we're seeing at the moment.
I'll take this one down then. Sorry, I'd put up a copy of the proposal form, and I was talking through that proposal form. And that proposal form's got to be complete and attached to the front of your study. Have a place and title in your, an idea and place in your title, and make clear links to the spec. The best and most efficient way is to get everything planned perfectly before you start. Your work's got to flow easily and logically. But if you have to change your plans, change your proposal form to fit, on that proposal form, you're going to have a rough copy that for a long time is going to be your working document. It has to go to your teacher, obviously, for the teacher to approve it. But if you need to change it, you've got to be able to change it. And before you start, you've got to have a good idea of what you're going to do. You've got to have a process worked out. But if you need to change it, change it. And when you come to hand in your project, don't leave empty content. Don't say you're going to do something in that first section and then not do it. It just looks silly if you do that. It looks as though you've not done it properly. Take it out if you've not done it. You need to explain how your ideas fit with the spec and with a wider field of geography. You need to refer in your focus section to the big ideas of the subject. Ideas about place, about movement, about change, about processes, and so on. Try to show that you are really involved with geography. You may never do anything like this again, but during your NEA, you are becoming part of the world of geography, part of the process. I suppose geography started in Roman times, but really modern geography started about the turn of the 20th century. And you've got to show how your work builds on what's gone before, on 120 years of geographical thinking and thought. Maybe the only time you ever do, but just for now, imagine you are a geographer. You'll use sub-questions, and those sub-questions, sub-hypotheses, have to be manageable. 2 or 3 sub-questions is fine. particularly this year. 4 or 5 is getting too much, and you're going to go well above the word limit, and you're going to waste time, and you're going to damage your the time available for other studies, other parts of your geography course, and other parts of your A levels. The methodology section is vitally important. This has got to be really cracked off before you start to work. Your methodology should flow smoothly from data collection, that's going out and getting your information, through data presentation, that's your maps and your graphs and your tables and so on, to your data analysis, whether that's statistical or written, verbal, and then to your conclusions. Well, no, you can't do your conclusions at this stage, can you? But your methodology, I think you should be linking collection, presentation, and analysis. So that when you go out to collect your data, you know how you're going to present it, and you know how much data you've got to get to present it. So you may be going to present it in terms of flow maps, or you may be going to present it in terms of a table, or you may going to present it in terms of a graph or a series of graphs. So you know what data you're collecting and how you're going to present it, and then how you're going to analyze it. So if you're going to do a chi-squared test, you have the right kind of data to do the chi-square test. If you're going to do the Spearman, you've got the right kind of data to do a Spearman. So right from the start, you know when you're collecting your data, how you're going to present it and how you're going to analyze it. Put that in your proposal. Now, there's not much room in the proposal that the board gives you. If you're doing it online, obviously, you can just keep on typing, filling in more detail, and this document will extend. But if you're doing it on paper, then just put an extra page in to add to your data proposal. You need a variety of techniques of data collection. But more important than variety is getting them relevant and suitable for the topic that you're doing. How many should you do? How many data collection techniques should you use? In the past, we have said 2 or 3 well-focused techniques are far, far better than 4 or 5 techniques just shoved in to make up the numbers. This year, that 2 to 3 really well-focused techniques counts even more than before, because you're short of time, you're working under pressure. So think of 2 or 3. It's got to be more than 1. You've got to have more than 1 technique, but 2 or 3 is the ideal number. Go up to 4 if you must, if you need to. I wouldn't go up to 5, not by any means. You are getting too complicated if you get up to 5. The executive summary, come back to that later. That comes at the end when you finish your work and you think, shall I do an executive summary? You may not know what one of those is. Your teacher will discuss it with you later. When you come to write up your study, you need to talk about planning. Where did you go? This element of place has got to come in right from the start. Where did you go? Why did you go there? What were you hoping to show or discover or prove when you were there? And how did you prepare before you went out, before you did any fieldwork collection, any data collection? And in your introduction, you need a review of the literature, which sounds very fancy. The literature that you use, you could just quote your textbook and say, this paragraph in the textbook gave me an idea that I could apply in my home area. And I thought this was the key idea in the textbook, and I could chop it and change it around and develop it and fit it to my particular place. And that's good if you do that. You should probably do something a little bit more. So at least use 2 or 3 different geography textbooks, or more specialized geography books. Maybe some that are aimed at, as they used to say, A-level and first year university. You could use journals like Geography or academic journals, but it's difficult to get hold of those. Your teachers may have links to libraries where they can get them. You may have friends or relatives who have links to libraries where they can get them, but it's difficult. The principal moderator says that he's the person who's in charge of the standardizing all your marks at the end. Very few people use journals in 2018. When they did, they were usually very good, but they're generally not necessary if other sources are referenced. So use journals if you can. If you can't, don't worry at all. But then, as well as the geography books, look at background papers, local authority plans, newspaper articles, and so on. You might be doing your work on a nature reserve. So Northumberland Wildlife Trust will have published stuff on the nature reserve probably. You might be doing stuff on a shopping centre, development of a new shopping centre. Well, the local authority will have plans for the shopping centre and the developer will have plans. You might be doing something on the Ousburn Valley, in which case there are all sorts of background papers you can get from the Ousburn Trust and from GA workshops. You might use quotes from interested parties in favour of a development or against development. That can all go as a review of the literature. And don't just use titles in your literature, use precise chapter and page references. But stay focused on the topic, stay relevant, don't overdo it, and please don't write a generic regional history. Please don't write long quotes from publicity handouts. We want to be up to date, we want to be brief, 3 to 5 sources, and then if you can refer back to those sources in your conclusions, that's a really good way of tying up your study at the end. Keep a record of sources that you use as you go along. I have done a lot of research producing exam papers and so on, and I always have to send in a list of my sources. And for a long time, I'd get on the internet, I'd find a source, I'd find a link, I'd find another source, I'd find another link. That'd give me another idea. I'd go to that, and I would wander and ramble through the internet. And when I came to the end, I had to go back and find all the sources that I used. And it might have been 4 months ago that I'd done it. And I wasted so much time going back, trying to refine the sources, particularly for internet sources that I'd used. So please, when you're doing this, avoid my mistake, be methodical. Every time you use an internet, you go to an internet resource, keep a record of it. Every time you use a newspaper source, keep a record of it and a copy of it and a date of it and so on. So that at the end, you may not reference all those sources in your final study, but you've got them all there. You can quote references, whether you do it all at the end or as footnotes at the bottom of the page or as brackets within the text. You have to put references, those sources, and plan it and be careful and organize yourselves. Now, the key thing that you'll be doing soon, some of you may well have started already, you must describe your methods of data collection. And when your teacher's marking this, or when the moderator's marking it, or if it's going to awards meetings for them to see what you've done, people need to look at your description of your data collection and say, if I follow that description, the method, could I repeat that data collection? That's what scientific study is about. Using a method to collect data, and then that method has got to be repeatable by other people. So you want to clear, precise description of how you collected your data. Now, who are you writing that description for? You're writing it for other geographers. You're not writing it for the general public. You're not writing it for 12-year-olds. You're writing it for good geographers. So you don't need to go into absolutely minute detail. You need to give a clear outline. If you're using ranging rods, you don't need to explain how you use ranging rods and a clinometer and how one person holds this and the other person holds that, and you stand somebody else measures the tape. You don't need all that sort of detail. If you say, we did a ranging rod survey, and a brief sentence description of a ranging rod survey, that's fine. I did a questionnaire, and here's an example of my questionnaire. That's fine. Although it's important that you also write about your sampling methods. If you do a proper sample, then it should show a cross-section of all the relevant people in that area. Given the time you've got, it may be very difficult to get your sample perfect, but you have to work to get it as good as you can. Now, this is important that in your cross-section of the dunes, you took your sample every 10 meters, or is it important that you took it at every break of slope? Or is it important that you took it at the middle of every slope segment? Any one of those three will be a reasonable way of doing it. You've got to choose one and explain why you did it. If you're doing a questionnaire, is it important you have an equal number of males and females? Is it important you have an equal number of different age groups? Obviously, if you're doing a travel to school study, different age groups isn't important. Obviously, if you're having to work within your bubble, then you can only use people within your year group. Think about this. Your sampling probably won't be perfect, but make it as best as you can and explain why you chose what you did, and then explain how well it worked and could it have been improved. And if you could say it could have been improved, fine. It doesn't have to be perfect. You're not expected to be perfect, but you're expected to be able to criticize it and say how and why it was wrong, or how and why it was imperfect, and how and why it could have been improved. That gains you marks. And as I say, we're on about gaining marks all the time. One little thing, if you're doing a questionnaire, you're going to write your questionnaire while you're sitting in your classroom or in your study at home. And you'll think of some good questions, but then you have to go out and actually try them in real life. And if you go out on the day of your study with 50 questionnaires printed out, and the first person you ask says, I don't understand that question 3, then you're sunk, because you've got to ask everybody the question 3, and probably everybody won't understand it. One ideal way of improving your data collection is to do a pre-test, to try out your data collection on a small number of samples, on a small number of people, or a small number of places on a sand dune, or a small number of places in the shopping centre, and see if it works. And if it doesn't work perfectly, then redraw your questionnaire or replan your transect. And I personally often suggested to my students, when you're doing a questionnaire, when you're going to do a pre-test, put a deliberate duff question in, and it won't work. And then you can change your questionnaire, and then in your analysis, your in your review of your techniques, you can say, I tried it this way, it didn't work, I changed it to that, it did work. Ba-boom, you've already picked up marks for developing ideas and improving and evaluating. So pre-testing is great. Also, when you're doing your data collection, what alternative methods might you have used and why did you reject them? And then I suppose after that, were you right to reject them? When you're doing this review, you discuss the overall success. There are almost certainly improvements you could have made. What I hate is people, as a marker, if I had more time, I would have collected more data. If you say that, you're really admitting that your sampling technique was wrong. If that's all you can say, you'd be far better to say why your sampling technique was wrong than to say, I would have collected more data. So not a bold statement, if I'd had more time, I would have collected more data. That's not going to gain you any marks. Then blaming the weather isn't going to gain you any marks. But saying how you struggle to overcome the weather issues, that will gain you marks. I took a clipboard in a plastic bag. I did all my writing inside the plastic bag. And I thought that would overcome the weather, but I got wet arms and they went into the plastic bag and made my sheet all soggy, so it still didn't work perfectly. But talk about how you did try to overcome the weather. And as I said at the start, talk about how you try to overcome the COVID problems. So COVID messed everybody up. So show how it messed you up and explain how you cope with the issues. Again, it'll pick your marks up for your evaluation. When you come to present, I think it should have moved on. The headings here should be methods of data presentation. Oh no, it's not. This is when I'm thinking about when you're describing your techniques, what you did and why you did it. Should you use a table or a text? Some people use tables and have what I did, why I did it, where I did it, and so on in the different columns of the table. It does mean you're a bit limited in how much you can write. If you write in text, it perhaps looks more A-level. The tables, GCSE, the more extended text is A-level. But a table's fine as long as you write clearly and precisely, you write in enough depth and detail, and explain what you did and explain why you did it, strengths and weaknesses, improvements, developments. So what you did, why you did it, strengths and weaknesses, improvements and developments, that's at least 4 columns. You are limiting yourself by using a table at A-level. Then when you come to present your data, do you embed your data in the text or do you add all your data in an appendix at the back? Do you write a bit about how you collected the data and then present that data and then analyze it and so on? That's embedded in the text and your writing flows from this is how I set out to collect, this is what I collected, this is how I presented it, and so on. That's one way of doing it. Some people prefer to put all their data in an appendix. That's their tables, their maps, their graphs, their diagrams. It all goes in a table at the end, in an appendix at the end. Either of those is fine, but do make sure your work's easy to navigate for the reader. So if it's all in an appendix at the back, make sure that you put page numbers so that when the reader needs to go to that graph or that map, they go to the right page, and the pages are clearly labeled. The reader, the teacher, the assessor, the moderator, they've all got to be able to follow it clearly. And if they can follow it clearly, they're happy with you. it puts them in a good mood. They tend to, however fair they try to be, they're happy when people present things clearly, and they're not happy when it's a struggle to get through it. And I suppose rightly, if it's a struggle to get through it, if they can't manage it easily, it's not good. They're right to take marks off. Please give some variety of data presentation techniques. Try to include at least one map that you've drawn to show your place. We get lots of people starting off, you know, I did my study in Heaton Park. This is the Heaton Park's in Newcastle. Map of the UK with Newcastle marked on it. Map of Newcastle that they've taken from Google or something with Heaton marked on it. Map of Heaton with the park marked on it. All that taken from the internet. Can you do at least one map? So your map can be the actual map of Heaton Park, showing all the different features of Heaton Park, the playgrounds, the cafes, the paths, and so on. You probably should present copies of your raw data, probably in the appendix, but then show that raw data in a process form. And when you process it, key point, you're trying to draw out trends. That's the overall pattern that the data shows. Relationships, links between one piece of data and another. Connections, how one piece of data affects another piece of data. And also, I've not put in there, anomalies, things in the data that don't fit. And you will have anomalies. People often think that if their data doesn't fit a perfect Spearman rank correlation, it's not working. Well, it is. It's the data, that is what you studied. And if it doesn't work, then you've either got to explain the few anomalies, or if the whole thing doesn't work, if the connections that the trends you expect to see don't come out, well, why didn't they? Was your hypothesis wrong? Was your data collection wrong? Can you come up with a better explanation for those trends? Can you come up with a better hypothesis? Or can you see, well, my hypothesis worked to a certain extent in these cases, didn't in these cases. In these cases, the reason it didn't work perhaps were da-da-da-da-da-da. So when your trends don't work, when it doesn't work out as you thought it would do, that's great. That tells you things to say in your analysis. If you did use a questionnaire, an environmental quality survey and so on, don't put them all in. Use one copy of the final version and put that in your appendix and show a tabulated set of results. Can I just say, a lot of people do questionnaires, and as I was saying before, they ask the first question, maybe they don't ask it, maybe they just fill it in, something about gender and something about age. So if you have a questionnaire with males and females and with different age groups on it, that's good. It shows you're getting a cross section. But also, why not break down your questionnaire results further? What did the male respondents say? What did the female respondents say? Can you divide them into subgroups to show how those two groups differed? Did they differ? They might have been the same. How do the different age groups differ? You know, is there a difference between the young, the middle-aged, and the old? You can do that if you ask the question, but often people don't bother subdividing their tables. So it's worth thinking of. Asking about males and females, age group, ethnic group, is not just to show you got a good survey, a good cross-section. it's also a possibility of showing differences in attitudes and behavior between those different groups. And it's great if you can do that. That's another good mark scorer. Then you come on to your analysis, and you need to think before you start how you're going to analyze it. I can't stress this often enough. You need to decide, are you going to put your analysis after each data set, or are you going to present your analysis in a completely separate section? Again, either is acceptable, but make it clear which way you're going. Whoops. Please try to use some statistical techniques, or at least one statistical technique. And a lot of people say, I'm hopeless at statistics. I can't do it. I can't do maths. Well, if you got to this stage, you can do some maths. You can work out some averages, can't you? Some means or medians or modes. You can work out some percentages. You might need a bit of help just doing it, reminding you what you did at GCSE maths. You can do possibly calculated best fit lines. You can do dispersion graphs. You can do standard deviation. The actual sums in standard deviation are quite complicated. You get quite big numbers in standard deviation, but the formula isn't difficult. It's time consuming, but a standard deviation is a great technique. It's a good geographical technique. But when you've done the technique, when you've come up with your averages or your percentages or your standard deviation figures, you've got to explain what they show. Don't just do the technique and then leave the interpretation to the reader. Explain what your statistical analysis shows. And oh, it's gone on twice again. I say, of course, you should also aim to include more sophisticated techniques like Spearman's or chi-squared, if you can. Don't try to do those if you don't understand them, or get yourself a lesson to make sure you do understand them. And get yourself a lesson before you start collecting data to make sure you're collecting the right sort of data if you want to do a Spearman or a chi-squared. But when you've done the technique, you must explain its significance clearly. The technique is almost worthless without the significance of your results having been understood by you and explained to the reader. So, when you do a statistical technique, it probably shows you the strength of any relationship. It shows you the direction of a relationship. Do they both go up at the same time, or does one go up and one go down? Or is it random? And then you've got the statistical significance. So there are three things you should be able to say: the direction of any relationship, the strength of any relationship, and the significance of any relationship. When you analyze the data, should you write out the techniques in full, or can you just enter the data into a program and print out the results? Well, it doesn't matter, either's okay. But it's essential that you show that you understand what you're doing. So you've got to explain why you use the technique and why your results are significant. You don't have to try to explain the statistics. Now the statistics work. You have to do the statistics following the rules and then explain what that final figure shows. And principal moderators have stressed that the understanding of the techniques is very important, and it is not uncommon for students to carry out complicated statistical analysis and then mess it up by not showing any relationships, by not showing any understanding of what their figure shows. Your conclusions, which are a long way away now, and you can come back to these later. They're going to refer to what you found out about the place and about the ideas, but they must refer back to your aims and objectives and the literature you base your ideas on. This is the circle of non-examined assessments, of inquiries. You come up with an idea, you give reasons for that idea, you collect the data for it, you present, you analyze, you conclude, and then you take your conclusions back, the idea you started with, and the concepts that you were testing, and the aims and objectives, and the literature you started with, and does it all fit? And if it fits, that's good. But your ideas may not have worked out, so don't worry. Why didn't they? And can you develop your ideas further? Or your ideas may have worked out to some extent. And then you get the best of both worlds. You can be pleased with what you've worked, with what worked, and you can show how you can develop your ideas further. And that's great. And I suppose most people's analyses do work to some extent. But if you're at the end, don't say something like, I've proved X's theory of Y was wrong. Don't say, I've proved that the theory of sand dunes changing in land was wrong because mine didn't. Because the world of geography has shown that in the vast majority of cases, sand dunes do change in land. If yours didn't fit, you could legitimately say something like, it doesn't seem as though the theory fitted, and then offer some tentative explanation. And it may be that there was some other factor working in your case, or it may be that your results weren't good enough. Well, too late to change that, but you can talk about how you could have improved it. But don't just dismiss the idea, build on it. In your whole review. And then perhaps you can suggest how your inquiry could be taken forward or used by other people in your conclusions. How next year's geography A-level students could take your work and see how it's changed, see how situations changed and developed since then. I used to know one school where they did this. They did coast studies at Flamborough Head in Yorkshire, and every year they came back with coast studies, and each year referred back to the previous year's study until the teacher left, because the teacher got her PhD on coastal change at Flamborough Head, and she'd moved on, she got a job in a university. So all the time she'd been using her students' inquiries to work on her PhD. And on the way, she got them some jolly good results. So I'm not criticizing her at all for that. It just shows your data collection could be really valuable and could be used by others. So good luck and be original, because these are strange times, and I hope we're going to get some really interesting studies and some really concentrated studies, because you haven't got time to waste. You need to get on with it now. You need to get yourselves organized. So good luck.
Thanks very much, John. That's great. Has had some really nice comments through the chat on with you know, thanks, and how useful some of the tips were. If anybody else has got questions to ask, if you'll put them in the box, the chat box, please. I'll keep an eye on those. Otherwise, I will just go through the couple of bits and pieces that have come through while you've been talking. One of the things is about the CRF. I don't know if you would like to share a different screen, John, and just perhaps so people can see the CRF just in case they're unfamiliar with it, and just pop that up on your screen.
Well, it didn't work when I did it before, did it?
No, it was your PowerPoint that we could see.
Yeah.
Weird. So you just have to go, obviously, share screen and then choose which screen you're going to share and click the one that shows the CRF. See if
That one. Has it come up now?
Yes, there we go.
Oh, good.
Brilliant. So do you want to go through some of that quickly? And then I've got a couple of other short questions and that's it.
If you haven't seen these, make sure you see them soon. First page, fill in your name and sign it. You'll sign it at the end to say that you've done the work on your own, and your teacher will sign at the end to back that up to the best of his knowledge. And that's making it a legal document. Here's the proposal form. Your title, place, and idea and place. I'm testing this idea in this place. Box of links to spec content, which can be fairly brief. If you're struggling to find a link to specification content for something you really want to do, it'll fit in changing places. Changing places will cover a host of evils. Almost any title I can think of, I could link to changing places as long as I had a place in the title. Hypothesis and sub-questions, a main hypothesis, and about 3 sub-questions. An investigation focus, basically a paragraph about what you're trying to do. But then the important thing for you now, before you start, is the planned methodology, the techniques you're going to use, the data collection, and the way you're going to present it, and the way you're going to sample it, the way you're going to sample it, the way you're going to present it, and the way you're going to analyze it, the analysis techniques you're going to use. Really, the boards only want you to put in the data collection techniques. I think you could waste your time if you don't show how your collection techniques link into presentation techniques.
Yeah.
And then your teacher writes at the bottom and says what's good and bad about it and approves it or doesn't approve it. You'll notice that it goes on to a 3rd page, which is the teacher marking it, and or a 3rd and 4th page with the teacher marking it. I suggest, teachers, that you all provide your students with a copy of the mark scheme before they begin. Then they know exactly all the boxes they've got to tick. Students, if your teacher hasn't provided with that, nag them. I think you ought to be working completely in the light, nothing hidden from you. Okay.
Yeah, that's really useful.
Shall I take that down now?
John. Yeah, that's the AQA one, obviously. So for those of you doing other exam boards, they're actually fairly similar. I think Edexcel's a landscape rather than portrait, but the idea is very similar.
All the boards have worked very closely together on all of this, and their criteria for marking are very similar, if not exactly the same.
Yeah. Great, thank you. I've got loads of emails and names coming through for certificates, so that's great. Thank you for those. Keep them coming. And what I'll do is just save the chat at the end, and so I get all the names and email addresses absolutely spot on. So it actually doesn't bounce back really. Just a quick question, John. These slides, have they already been made available, or are they going to be shared with Amy?
I think I sent them to Amy.
Yeah.
Is Amy here?
So. She's just gone off. But yeah, we can just make sure. So you know, if anybody hasn't got the slides, who's listening in, and would like them, just you know, reply. It's Amy Girdleston, who's our secretary. She sent you the Zoom link. So if you just reply to that, or just check that chain of emails, actually they're probably already there. But if not, just send her an
Actually,
email.
I don't think they are. I think she sent out those thoughts on COVID.
Aha.
But okay. I don't think she sent out the slides yet.
Okay. All right. So I'll make sure that goes out. I'll just make myself a little note here. Yes, great. Let's just have a quick look. Lots of names and email addresses, brilliant. And some really nice comments about how informative it's been.
Can I inform you of one more thing then, please?
Yeah, of course.
Given the difficulties that you've got, the different boards have got together and have said that they're going to be much more, they're going to be as flexible as possible in talking about primary and secondary data collection. If you feel that you have to get most of your information off the internet or off electronic sources, as long as you can show that you have taken the data and you've worked that data and you've used it, they're going to give you credit for it.
Yeah.
Now, still, you need to get out and collect some primary data, even if your primary data is just taking photographs or field sketches or whatever. You've got to show that you've been out in the field. But if the worst comes to the worst and you have to rely very much on internet data, then that'll be fine. Now, I know in the past, some people, I mean, students in wheelchairs have not been able to go out and do dune studies, for instance, and they've had special consideration, and they've been able to share data from other their friends from the same group have been. You're not going to have to apply for special consideration. You know, if you're shielding and you can't go out at all, or a minimal amount of going out, then okay, use secondary data. Go on the internet. I could send to Amy another form with a lot of suggested internet sources. I'll do that as soon as we've finished. I'll send that to Amy.
Yeah, I'm
she
sure
can send that on to
really
everybody.
Useful. Yeah, super. Thanks, John.
It's a long and complicated document, but at the end, it gets precise about internet sources.
Yeah, great. I'm sure that'll be really useful, and especially if it's a soft copy, then anything that looks useful to learners who are on here, you know, they can click through those links perhaps, and that'll make it a lot quicker, a lot easier for them to do some of their own research. Just to add to what you were saying, John, about primary data collection, I've had a couple of learners the last few years that have used Microsoft Forms instead of a questionnaire. So instead of doing it face to face, they've actually done it online and have sent it to teachers, and they've, you know, sent it out to other classes and staff and so on.
Oh, that's primary. That's collecting your own data, though, isn't it?
Absolutely. And so it's not face to face, but it's primary data collection using a Microsoft form with all sorts of, you know, bipolar surveys and all sorts of things on there. So
what about using webcams that are online? You can collect primary data from a webcam. I'm not quite sure how.
You can do wave counts, for example. There's a one at Redcar that you can use as long as the tide's in. Yeah. There's quite a few. You can go online and just see the map of the UK and where the webcams are. Yeah. I think something came up in one of the Geo NEA tutorials about that recently, and that was really useful. I know a couple of my learners thought they might start comparing somewhere locally with somewhere a bit further away using that. So yeah, lots of options. And those of you who have used ArcGIS and can use Survey 123 on your cell phones or on an iPad, that's a really good data collection resource as well, of course. You know, if you haven't done that at school and you want to a bit of a hand with that, just get in touch with us. You can certainly use the GA Tyne email and get in touch with me, and I can help you with that. We're actually involved in a consultation with Newcastle University as to how to help learners use ArcGIS a bit more effectively. And that's I'm in the Thursday afternoon session this week. So if you've got questions about Survey 123 and ArcGIS, that you know something you're struggling with, send them to me through ga@Tyne. I'll just put that back up on the screen. There we go. This one here. And let me just make sure I've shared the right thing with you. There we go. Is it going to work? Slowly. There we go. And so this email here comes straight through to me. And you're welcome to get in touch if you've got any GIS issues that you need sorting out for your NEA. That's really useful. Okay, and I'm just going to leave that up there. That's our next lot of talks. So there's a field work for primary school teachers next week, followed by sustainable and smart cities with Philip James, who is Newcastle University geomatics department. So that's all GIS stuff in a couple of weeks' time. And then we've got a series of 3 Ousburn Valley workshops run by Liz Cowans and John Smith. That's after half term. So we've got all sorts of things. We've got, you know, others in the pipeline, like it says at the bottom. So just while I'm just going to quickly check the chat box. I'll leave that up there for you while I just check the chat box quickly. Just see if there's any more questions. Lots of thanks, John.
It's a pleasure. And I'm only sorry not to see your happy smiling faces,
Yeah.
and to get your happy smiling questions. Or your
Yes.
worried questions even.
Yeah, and I'm sure if there's any questions that occur to people after the fact, again, they can send them to me and I can forward them on. Would that be all right, John?
That'll be fine. Yeah.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
Super.
Remembering that I can only do a certain amount. It's got to be your work, but I can comment on your work. I can't rewrite it for you.
If only, hey?
No.